Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. I'm delighted to be welcoming a long-time collaborator, long-time friend, EJ Hassenfratz, creative director, School of Motion, amazing artist, teacher, educator, and of course, if you go onto cineversity.com, you can learn from his wisdom and his beautiful designs for the intro into cinema. So if you want to learn that, so please do that. And also, EJ is, as you may not know, licensed to pour beer in Oregon. So, which is a fact.
It is.
I don't know if you'll be covering that today, but
no.
EJ is going to be looking at some of the recent introductions into cinema for the simulations and the cloth dynamics and so on.
Indeed.
So we're really, really looking forward to this one. So over to you, EJ.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. Hello, everyone online. I think hopefully that's the camera that's on the internet. But yeah, my name's EJ Hassenfratz. I am creative director at School of Motion, which is an online education platform teaching motion design. And it's not just a passive kind of learning type of path. It is all about learning with teaching assistants, so you actually learn the thing. So we all watch a bunch of YouTube tutorials, and it seems like you just can't retain anything, because sometimes people doing YouTube tutorials just don't know what they're talking about. They're teaching it wrong. I kind of did that early on when I did YouTube tutorials, but I have two classes over at School of Motion. One is Cinema 4D Basecamp right here. That's if you're totally brand new to Cinema 4D in general. So if you're new to 3D, new to Cinema 4D, definitely recommend you check this out. And then if you've been using Cinema 4D for quite a little bit and you want to up your game as far as learning third-party renders like Redshift, learning dynamics, learning character animation, rigging, all that type of stuff, that's the class that is for you. But as far as a little bit about myself, creative director at School of Motion, been doing using Cinema 4D for about, I'm getting old, I'm turning 40 in a couple weeks, but I've been using Cinema 4D for maybe 12 years now. And I've actually been doing teaching for about almost 10 years. So I just really love Cinema 4D just because how accessible it is. I always say that if it wasn't for Cinema 4D, I don't know if I ever would have gotten to 3D, because I'm not a very technical-minded person. I love just being able to get into an application and just being able to make stuff, just create art without having to okay, do I need to learn some code for this or something like that? But yeah, so that's why I love Cinema 4D. And just to give you a little bit of a taste of the type of work that I do, let me show you my reel. Awesome. So yeah, actually this scene right here and these animations, this was done without any really difficult rigging, and I actually have a whole series on Cineversity. As Simon mentioned, I also have an intro to Cinema 4D class on Cineversity, so always check out Cineversity if you want to get up and running in Cinema 4D, because there's so much great free content up there. And what am I doing? Sorry, I'm new to PC, so I'm always going to screw something up. But as far as my presentation today, I am going to be talking about the new simulation engines inside of Cinema 4D. So if you know Cinema 4D, we've had cloth, soft body dynamics, rigid body dynamics for quite a long time, and it hasn't been updated in quite a long time as well. But in the last version of Cinema 4D R26, the team at Cinema 4D at Maxon have started updating cloth and rope dynamics to this brand new system that is like super stable and like super impressive as far as the power. So I did this little trick where I was, trying to learn the new system and creating stuff. And when you go online, you always see these very complex cloth sims and dynamic sims, and usually it's done by like a Houdini artist. So what I wanted to do is see if I could trick people to see if I could make something and make people believe that I made it in Houdini. So I posted this tweet just this past week, and I was like, dang, Houdini's hard. And I had this little alt text on Twitter, which you can hide. So if you press that alt thing, you can actually see that it's like, no, it's not Houdini, it's the new C4D cloth. But I tricked so many people that people were like, oh man, I gotta learn that too, or like, oh, I think there's this really good course on it and all that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting and really great to play around with what is possible inside of the new cloth and dynamic system. So this is just a sample of some of the stuff that I'm going to cover today. And let me actually show you like a little mini reel of some of the project breakdowns I'm gonna do. Whoops. Stop. And I actually present again on Thursday at noon. So if I don't get to everything, I'll get through the rest of all this stuff on Thursday as well. But here's just a little bit of a taste of my experimentations with the new cloth and the new rope simulations here. So those are some of the things I'll be breaking down today. Oh, thank you very much. Clap to the Maxon team too. Actually, I got the guy who is working on the new dynamic sim system is right here in the audience. So I'm like kind of nervous if I do something wrong. But it's incredible. Like I've definitely patted his back. I owe him a few beers just because of how awesome some of the new stuff is. It's like I said, I've been like blowing my own mind, like just pressing play in the viewport and stuff like that. But if you go, I just have like the simple plane object. I'm gonna hit NB to go to garage shading with lines. So you can see I got a fairly dense mesh here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna right click, and all the new simulation stuff is in the simulation tags. And we're gonna basically be dealing with cloth and rope, mostly cloth, because I had so much fun with cloth that like I barely got to rope. But most of the things you can do with cloth, you can also do with the new rope system. So I'm going to throw cloth on there, and you'll see in the tag settings, there are some like new options here. You got balloon, plastic deformation, all this tearing. There's all of these things that I'm not even going to be able to get to, just because there's so much you can do with just these settings here. Highly recommend you check out Noseman Thanasis tutorials on Cineversity, also Rocket Lasso, Chris Schmidt. He dives deep into like a bunch of all this stuff. Yeah, and there's just going to be so much new content with covering all of these type of things. But when I was learning this new system myself, everything kind of made sense once I understood what each of these things did, as well as like the global dynamic setting. So if you've used the old dynamic system, you can hit Control D to get to your project settings, and then the bullet system is the old system if you've used the old dynamic systems. And so this is basically the settings that control the scene wide simulation. So like the scale of your scene, we had these different steps per frame, so how many calculations per frame to create an accurate dynamic simulation. Well, that's the old system. Here's the new system. So you have your gravity, your scene scale, so that's all familiar. You can also choose whether this is going to run on your CPU or your GPU. So this is actually great because this new system is multi-threaded, and it shows. Like, it's super fast. It plays back incredibly well in your viewport. But you can see there's like a bunch of all these settings, and at first this really intimidated me because a lot of these things kind of sound similar like iteration, substeps, smoothing iterations, collision passes, like polish iterate. It can be very daunting, but I'll tell you that once you wrap your head around it, it's actually fairly easy. So substeps is exactly like your steps per frame of the old simulation. It's just going to make a more accurate simulation. Iteration just kind of is like an exponential add-on to it to make even more make it even more accurate. And then the smoothing is if you had like very poppy animation. So with the old dynamic system, things would just like pop every now and then. This is actually the option that can help fix that kind of stuff. So instead of just pointing at options and numbers, let me actually show you some tests that I did and show you how each of these settings and the actual cloth settings work on an object. So I got, because it's very important to understand, and it's not very hard to get. So bendiness. So you can see on the cloth tag, there's bendiness. Bendiness is basically the propensity of it to, the cloth to fold along itself. And the new dynamic system's actually particle-based. So it's almost like you think of things as a particle. So if a particle can go close and wrap around another particle, that's basically what that's controlling, and that's driving the simulation. So what are these numbers? So 100 is the number we would put in bendiness, and you can see how much more very detailed cloth folding we have on this piece of cloth. And then we have a value of 5. You can see we have not as much detail, but this is looking pretty good. You can actually see that this is a little more floppy as well because it's allowed to bend a little more. And then 0.2 is like, it's actually a little bit more stiff. There's not a lot of bendiness at all. And you can see by just adjusting the bendiness value and literally nothing else in the scene, how much, what kind of different looks that you can have, okay? And you can see all that little jitter right there. That's something that smoothing iteration would actually help, so that hopefully that makes sense. Now, as far as stretchiness, let's talk about the stretchiness. Let me get out here. Let me actually do this. There you go. So stretchiness, it's kind of aptly named. The higher the value, the more stretchy and the more the particles are allowed to kind of like stretch from the other particle, okay? So if you have a high stretchiness value, you're gonna have this cloth like really stretch down and kind of hang. And then at 20, you can see that it's a little less stretchy. And then at 0, there's absolutely no give whatsoever, okay? So that's stretchiness. Let's go to mass. Mass is a big thing, and you know, to be honest, in the previous simulation engines, I never really touched the mass number in dynamics, but it's like, it's literally how heavy an object would be, right? So here is mass at 100. So this is like super like dense kind of cloth. Here's 10 and here's 0.1. So you can see that depending how much your mass is, with all of these settings being the same, how much you can get different cloth looks out of just the mass. So it's like if you have a very high mass, it's almost like the particles can't move very much at all because it's just such a dense object. And then we got scale. This is a huge thing, a huge factor when it comes to literally anything in Cinema 4D, whether it's like using a third-party renderer that's based in real-world values like a redshift or an octane or whatever. When you're using like, you know, light fall-offs and stuff like that, you want to build your scene at real-world scale. So I always get like the little scaly figure object. And if you don't do this, I highly recommend you do it. Got the figure object. Whoops. And this is like a good example of like, okay, this, if I turn that object right here into a piece of cloth, it's like a rug, right? But if you went and you were just willy-nilly just throwing a plane in here and you're like, I want to make this really big and I want this to look like a flag and have a dynamic simulation that's like a flag, well, that's a massive flag. And when you input values into the dynamic simulation, it's not going to look right. But you'll see that with this, let's get this back here. Come on. You can see that this is a sphere that's 450 centimeters, and this is a sphere that's 80 centimeters, and it's the exact same cloth settings. So the size and the scale of not only your collider object, but the cloth object really drives and makes a huge difference. Like 450 centimeters, that's, like I said, it's like a massive tarp or like a Macy's Day Parade blimp kind of, or float or something like that. So scale is a massive factor. Always, always, always build dynamic objects in real world scale. If you want to make a flag, you're not going to make a plane that big. You're going to make it that big, okay? And you'll get a much more accurate flag looking kind of simulation out of it, okay? So I'll just delete that. And then let's go into these dynamic simulation settings, because they actually, the cloth settings and the dynamic simulation settings in the project really have a lot of interplay, and it's important to understand how they relate to each other. So substeps not only makes the simulation a little bit more accurate, but it actually changes the simulation as well. So you can see that with, again, all of the cloth values the exact same, and just adjusting the substeps in the simulation, project simulation settings, we have a value of 15, we get this look. We have a value of 30, we have a more accurate simulation, but it's a little bit more like, the cloth's a little bit more tighter feel. And then substeps at 100, you can see that it actually is like really stiff, and we got a totally different, like it's not as stretchy either. So substeps actually changes a lot more than just the accuracy of the simulation. It can actually change some of these properties at the same time. And just to show you like the values between the interplay between substeps and bendiness, here's that bendiness of 0.5 and substeps of 10. Here's a bendiness of 10 and substeps of 100. You would think the bendiness, bringing the value of the bendiness up, would actually make it more bendy, but because we're getting more substeps, the more stiff and the more accurate the simulation will be. So it's always this interplay between those two objects. So hopefully after that, I haven't just totally made you all fall asleep or anything like that. But now that we know a little bit about some of those settings, let's make some cool stuff, all right? So let's go. We got this piece of cloth, or this piece of, it's a plane object. I'm going to be calling plane objects cloth a lot. But you can see that we have some pretty high segments. And in the previous versions of Cinema 4D, you would not want to have this many segments, because it would not play back in your viewport at all. But with the new cloth simulations, it's incredibly fast. So let's go. I'm going to hit play, and it always hangs up a little bit at frame 0 just to calculate stuff, and then it goes. And you can see it's just falling. That's not all that exciting. So I'm going to go to Control or Command D, go to your simulation settings, and I'm just going to turn off gravity. So now I'm going to hit play, and it's just going to be there. It's not going to move at all. But an important part about the look of your cloth is not only how many segments or how much detail your mesh has, but it's also the objects and the forces in the scene that are interacting with your cloth. So if I go to the Simulate tab, I'm going to spend a lot of time with a lot of these force settings. So if I go and I add some turbulence to my scene, and I hit play, you can see that something's happened. Let me hit N and then A to get back to garage shading with outlines. You can see that my strength is fairly low. If I bring this up to, say, 50, you can start to see a little bit of ripple. Let's up the scale. That's basically, you can think of turbulence as like a fractal noise, or like a noise shader. And you can see all of this stuff happening. And this is like out of the box stock dynamics. I didn't even adjust anything but turn off the gravity. And already we got a really nice simulation. And like, this is looking really good. If you did this in the old cloth, it would have probably exploded at frame 3, and then it would have hung up your computer. But this is incredible how much you can get done here. So let's talk about like the detail. And we already got like really nice fine wrinkle detail here. And that's partly because of how high or how dense a mesh we have here. And again, you would typically like go low and then throw this in like a subdivision surface, to make that. And like, that's even really super fast. That's almost playing back at real time. Like, we can go 100 and 100, still running really, really nice. So we can have a lot of fun with these, like the strength of the turbulence. We can go into the cloth settings. Let's bring the bendiness up to like 50. and you're going to see that this is going to really wrinkle over itself. We can go and let's grab like a sphere, make this smaller, and you can actually designate things as collider objects. So I'll go, let's up the sphere segments, and I'll right click, go back to the simulation tags, and we'll go to not cloth, but just collider. So you're designating that this object is going to be able to collide into the cloth, but it's not going to actually become cloth itself. So I can just rewind the simulation. Let's go to the sphere, and I'm just going to boop, start playing around with this. And like this is where Cinema 4D becomes a video game for me, where you can just have a lot of fun. And actually, a cool little quick tip thing, if you actually did, let me actually go here. I think I have, let's see, my guide, axis, there we go. If you want to say, you're like, I want to record the simulation or this animation of this sphere, you can totally do that using this thing called Cappuccino, which is right down here. And you can actually record into keyframes the movement of an object as you're moving it in your viewport. So I'm just going to click on, I just need to record the position. So this is like motion trace in After Effects, if you're familiar with that. I'm going to go start real time, and nothing's going to happen until I click my mouse, and you could see the animation path there. So I can go and I can animate this sphere, move it around, whoops, and kind of create whatever animation I want with that, and like art direct the movement as well if I wanted to, and then release my mouse. You can see we have all these keyframes. If I go to the timeline here, see there's the position tracks and all that stuff. And then if I wanted to like render this out, I can just hide the sphere from viewport view and render view by clicking the little stoplights here. And we have this like cool little simulation with this like invisible thing affecting it. But it almost looks like a force is affecting it as well. And I mean, we can, now that we got that going, we can, let's crank up the bendiness even more. Let's try to get as many wrinkles as we can. So again, we'll turn off the subdivision surface. Let's go 200 and 200. Of course, because we're adding more detail, I mean, that's still running really, really nice. Like in the viewport, this machine has a single 3090. I got two at home. Don't want to brag too much, but this runs even faster at home. So now you can play around with like, let's really up the friction. So let me go back here real quick. Let's up the friction to like 3, so it will want to cling to that invisible sphere a lot more. Be really, really clingy. Where's that sphere? Where's the sphere going? There it is. And you can see, like if we throw this on that subdivision surface, that smooths everything out. And again, this is stock settings for the project. So you might see like some intersections maybe, and that's where if you see your cloth intersecting with itself, you would want to go into your simulation settings and up the collision passes here. So all of these options is a more accurate simulation. These options here help for preventing any intersections, okay? And damping actually makes things seem like they're underwater, so it actually makes the energy that are in the particle sims kind of, the energy dissipates faster. So if I really crank up the damping, I usually used to say dampening, but there's no EN. But I did that for about probably 5 years, said damping is dampening. But you can see that when we have the damping up really high, this is going to look like everything is actually, it's so dampened. Yeah, see, it's a little bit like it's underwater, which is really cool. Everything seems like a little bit stiffer, but like, look at all those wrinkle details. That looks freaking great. All right. So again, like I've went on so many tangents with just like a single piece of cloth and stuff like that, and just the turbulence, because again, turbulence is a huge thing. All the forces in your scene are really going to contribute to the look. So what I like to do as well is, you know, maybe get a very small noise turbulence, duplicate this, get a bigger scale turbulence, duplicate this again, and get like a really big scale for my turbulence. So now if I see both of these, at once. Let me turn off the subdivision surface here. So this is with the big turbulence. Let me crank up the value. You can see that's like, you can see how big that turbulence is, and you can see all these resulting wrinkles, which looks really good. Now, let's turn off that, and let's turn on this medium-sized turbulence, which is about, let's give it a scale of 77. And you can see what that looks like. You see the pinching. And then we can get the very small turbulence here. Let's bring, so super small. And you see we get these even smaller little bumps there, and we can adjust the strength. And the frequency is like how much that noise is animating over time. So you can combine, what I love to do is like combine all these three kind of like fidelities of noise to create this really nice flowing simulation. So we got a big, medium, small turbulence. And then of course you can go in here, and we got other forces here as well. We got wind. So the wind is always going to blow in the positive Z direction. So if I crank up the wind here, this will be affected not only by the turbulence, but it'll also start getting blown by the wind object here as well. And then I can right click, go to animation tags, vibrate, and this will just add some procedural vibration or rotation here. That's really, really fast. Let me do like 0.2. And you can see now we have just, it's like the wiggle expression in After Effects, where I can just have this wind just kind of blowing this way and that. We got this really cool flowy animation. Throw on subdivision surface, looking really, really nice and wrinkly. So let's go, let's see. Let me break down how I did. Let's see. So with a combination of the wind and the turbulence, like this is how I created this piece right here. I just used two plane objects. That's all that was. Let me go to this one right here. So it's incredible what you can do with just some simple forces. So the one thing I like to do here is, let's go NB. You can see that my cloth is 100 by 100. Let me make this a little bit more dense and hit NA to get back to Garage shading with outlines. And we are going to go ahead and we are going to again let's grab a turbulence just to have some kind of movement going on here. Actually, you know what? I need to add a cloth object. So let's go right click, simulation tag, cloth, and then Command or Control D to just turn off that gravity again. And let's go and hit play. And so we should just have our turbulence acting upon itself. Like right out of the box, just with a simple turbulence, that looks pretty awesome. But I'm going to turn off that turbulence right now, and I'm going to go back into my simulation menu, and I'm going to grab a rotation. So a rotation object will add rotational forces, and the rotation's always happening around the Z-axis here. So if I go and I hit play, let's bring this way down. You'll see that we just got this like really weird twitchy kind of thing. But what we can do is like all that rotational force is happening at once. So let's turn on this turbulence, bring the strength down, hit play. And I don't know why that's doing that, but let's go. Let's see. Strength, field, rotation. Let's actually use force. So if you don't know what these different drop downs do, force takes into account the actual mass of your object. So if I go to cloth, there's the mass setting right there. So I'll hit play. And it's just doing that again. All right, let's see what's going on here. Let's actually control the rotation. And instead of having, so right now we're just applying rotation to all of the objects here, to all the polygons at once. What I'm going to do is I'm going to control the strength of this with a field. So what I want to do is like, okay, in the middle of, say, this cylinder, like right here, let me actually rotate this. And I'll rotate the cylinder here. What we're going to do is the rotation is going to be around this axis, and we're going to limit the rotation strength to inside of this cylindrical field. So if I hit play now, why is this not working? Let's see. Did I do something in the settings? Let's just go to a whole new project here, because I might have screwed up my settings in that one. So let's just rebuild this really quick. High settings, high settings. Let's do Z and make this a little smaller. And let's grab forces, rotation, right click, go to simulation, cloth, and then go Command D, turn off the gravity. Cross your fingers. Still the same thing, man. All right, let's see what's going on. Well, let's diagnose. Like I said, I learned cloth literally a couple weeks ago. Let's go strength. Let's get some turbulence here. Is the turbulence working? Let's turn off the rotation. Okay, that's working. I turn on rotation. That's just doing all this weird stuff. Let's go back. Force. Angle speed 1.5. Let's rotate this like so. There we go. Okay, so I think what was happening is the rotation was dead center right directly on that plane object. And because it was sharing the same exact space as the rotation object, it was like being all weird. But since I moved that axis of rotation again, the rotation is going to happen along around this z-axis. So hit play. There we go. That's working nice. So now if I go back to my other floaty cloth dance scene, oops. There we go. So if I just, let's move the rotation just a little bit out of here. This scene should work now. Nope, that's not. All right, I'm tempting fate. Let's just get it with this one that's working. All right, so we got the rotation. Let's up this rotation angle speed. So you can see we got the turbulence and we got the rotation. But it's applying the same speed of rotation to the entire thing. So what we can do is get some really nice twisty, floaty cloth animation by just restricting the rotation object to a field. So if I grab this, let's grab a capsule. If you see this little wireframe, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, inside of this capsule, we are going to have 100% of this angle speed of 3 from the rotation force. And everything between this inner area and the outer area is going to have a fall off from 3, a speed of 3 to 0. So everything outside of this capsule is not going to really get any of this angle speed at all from the rotation. So now if we do this, you can see, whoa, we got all this rotation in the middle. And because there's like, the middle is driving the force, we're getting this really cool kind of spinny action going on here. If we bring this down to say 1, and then I can like, let's rotate this capsule. And you can also, again, rotate which direction it's rotating. So now everything's rotating around this z-axis. So one cool thing we can do is I can right-click on the rotation here. And just like I did with, what was I doing before? With the turbulence, and you can adjust, or the wind. And I was changing the rotation with a vibrate tag. I can do the same thing with the rotation force. Enable rotation. Let's crank up these values. Let's bring the frequency, which is just like how fast the vibration is going to happen. And so this is going to, if I select the rotation, you can see how it's going to start rotating. And as this is having the vibrate tag move the direction in which the rotation axis is, we get this really cool flowing animation that looks really, really great. And let me give myself like a few more frames here. So I'll just give 300 frames. And this is looking really nice. So now we can go into, again, this is stock settings. I didn't even like change the bendiness at all. I didn't change the thickness, the mass, nothing at all. I can go into the settings here. The one tip I'll give you is if you want more wrinkles, put in low lub steps. Put in low sub steps. So if I put in 5, you're going to see a lot more wrinkles, okay? And then I can also go in here and say, give me more bendiness. And we're going to get super, super detailed cloth and wrinkles, and you're going to see that turbulence kind of affect it even more. So I'm just going to bring the strength down just a touch. And let's change this to force, because again, force is going to allow us to have it interact with like what is the mass of it. And we got this super cool flowing cloth. Let's do this. Feel like an infomercial where if you do this, you're not just going to get one cloth object, you're going to get two for the price of one. So we're just going to get another cloth object here. Let me actually just create a material so it's colored differently, so you can make out one from the other. So blue and white. And I'm going to hit play. It's going to think about it. And then boom. We got two cloth interacting with each other. Again, if we did even a few frames of this in the old cloth system, it would have exploded all over the place. And yeah, you couldn't do anything at all. But if I can adjust like the size of the capsule field on the fly here. And we got all of these nice interactions. And again, if you see any like popping or anything like that, which I'm actually not, going into your dynamic settings and bringing up the smoothing iterations would solve that. The damping will again make everything look like it's kind of underwater and floaty, which is really cool. But this is just super cool to be able to get this type of look with literally two force objects and no keyframes whatsoever. Okay, so we can, you know how this looks a little weird, like flat in the middle? What we can do is with this rotation object, we can actually break up this capsule field by going in, and let's grab a shader field, and let's change this to, let's do multiply. So this is going to, if I load up some noise, it's almost like adjusting a mat. So I'm like adding turbulence to like a spherical feathered mat, circular mat. So that's basically what's going on there. I'm going to go and I'm going to crank up the global scale of this noise. And let's adjust the contrast here. So there's the noise. Let's see what this looks like with that noise, that shader being multiplied on top of that capsule field. Hopefully we got rid of like that weird flat area that was in the middle there. So you can see that broke that up a little bit. So what we can do now is let's go and let's bring up the relative scale so we have a little bit more stretched noise. Let's maybe make this noise smaller because I want to get rid of this little flat area there. Let's do this. So you can see there's that noise like represented as how much it's controlling like the strength of that capsule field. So what we can do is actually make this noise animate, go 0.2, right click, animate, and you can see how fast that's moving. So now we can have an animated noise, multiply it on top of our capsule field, and we can get this kind of more clothy look, and it kind of removes that weird flat detail that was in there. Looking nice. So now we have this like cool rotation happening. Let's remove all that damping though, so we can get all this to flow a little bit more freely. And that's basically how I did this, what I call the floaty cloth dance. I put in this cylinder in the middle and then just threw a collider tag on it. And then I just have the this rotation object here. And then I also have a attractor, which is just going to help attract the cloth to the axis center of that attractor object. This is a super small strength. But you can see how this is going to wrap all around my this cylinder. And if I hit NB, you can see the mesh isn't actually all that dense either. But you got this cloth interacting with another piece of cloth, interacting with a collider, which is really, really nice. Let's go into here. And let's see. Let's go to, so again, I apologize because I got so obsessed with the cloth that I barely did stuff with the rope stuff, but I'll get into more of the rough stuff, the rope stuff later, maybe on Thursday. But just show that you have the same rotation, the same attractor, the same turbulence forces. And I had that working with cloth. You can also have that working with the rope dynamics too, or the spline dynamics. So you can see all of this stuff rotating around. So here I'm just cloning an N-side spline. And you can see I got this little rock in the middle, which actually comes in the asset browser now. They always are adding new assets to the asset browser. So you can see all these nice cool rocks, because everyone likes to do their like very moody rock renders for whatever reason. So there's some rocks in there. But you can see how this is like going pretty nice. I even got a vibrate tag on the stone, so that's moving with all these noodles interacting and colliding with each other. Let's see. All right, so now let's go and I'll show you how I did. Here's just another example of like how you can clone cloth and also be able to apply cloth to it. So the trick to that is not having the cloth object on the individual cloth, but to put the cloth object on, or the cloth tag on the cloner. So I'm cloning, let's do 7 cloth pieces. Again, still using the rotation, the attractor, and you can see all of this stuff interacting. So if you want to clone something and apply cloth dynamics to it, just apply the cloth tag to the cloner and that'll get the job done. How much time do I got? Okay, all right. Let me show something real quick. So I'm going to let's show the rotation bit here. Oops. I'll show you how I did this really quick. So this is something I've seen a lot being done in like X particles and stuff like that. So similar concept to using the rotational force and fall off. Let's go here. Cloth twist. All right, so I got a cloth object here, and you can see the segments are 150 by 150. Hit NB, there you go. Those are the subdivisions. And let's go and let's apply a cloth tag to this. And then let's go Command D. Let's just turn off, turn off the gravity as well. We'll give it a little bit of gravity maybe. And then underneath I have just just like a floor basically that this can fall onto. And I'm going to go and add a rotation force. And again, the rotation is going to happen along the Z. So if I want this to twist and bunch in the middle, I'm going to need to rotate this, rotate the rotate upward. So it's going to rotate around this Z axis. Okay. So let's go and let's hit play. And again, this is just going to like rotate everything all at once. So let's go and add the field. Let's get a spherical field on this field force. And again, this is going to have 100% of the angular speed in the inner wireframe, and then it's going to slowly taper off to 0% strength of this angle speed. So let's do this like pretty low at first. 152, that's very precise. Let's do the force again. And so what we should have now is, we got this cool angular force doing its thing. And what we can do at this point is adjust, like let's go in the middle here. And we got this nice little twisting. And of course we want this to calm down. So what we could do is just go to the rotation, and we can actually have this like super high at first. So maybe like 3. It's not super high, but we can actually bring this and animate this down to like a force of 0.5. So we can have a lot of force twisting the cloth at first, and then it kind of calms down and kind of comes at rest. So we got that going. So let's actually make more wrinkle detail. So Command D, let's go, and remember we can adjust how much wrinkle 2 ways. We can adjust the bendiness. I'm actually going to bring this down, and I'm going to add even more friction. So it's going to try to stick to the ground object there a little bit better. And then Command D, go to the simulation. Let's lower our sub steps to about 5. Let's do some smoothing just so there's no popping. And dampening, let's bring up to 15. And so that'll make the energy kind of dissipate even faster. And now we got something like this. You can see because we lowered the sub steps, we're getting a lot more wrinkles. Throw on that subdivision surface, and we got nice and smooth. So now because we're having that angle strength animate down, and we can actually have this just animate to a stop. You can get this really nice wrinkle simulation here with, again, literally 2 keyframes, a rotation object with a spherical field, and you can art direct how tight this knot is by just making this spherical field smaller, okay? Boom. So this is really great because now it's going to rotate and twist in the rest of this cloth into the center, and you can see how this is going to like start to bunch up. But again, I have these keyframes, so... Okay, I'm getting hooked off the stage, so I'm going to leave it at that. But again, man, I didn't get through as much as I wanted to. But I have another slot on Thursday at noon. So if you want to see more cloth goodness and rope, come on back. Same bat time. Not the same bat time, but the same bat channel. But thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
So great, EJ. Absolutely. And EJ will be back on Thursday at midday at 12 p.m. for more and enhancements about this stuff. And I know you mentioned it at the beginning. There we go. So where you can go to find out more about EJ. And as you mentioned, please go to Cineversity to check out your amazing Getting Started in Cinema course.
Oh, yes. Actually, actually, like good resources for cloth, rope, dynamics. Like Vincent Schwenk actually has some stuff on Cineversity. Yep. His cloth stuff and experiments are awesome. He also knows Houdini, so it's cool to see his like process of like what he's doing in Houdini, what he's doing with the new cloth. Motion Punk Thanos, same kind of thing. He's a very talented artist, also using Houdini, also playing around with the new cloth. He's got a Patreon, so he's also teaching this the dynamic stuff. Subframe Studio, Mikhail, he's got a Patreon, also doing cool dynamic stuff. Rocket Lasso Chris Schmidt, he's going to be here tomorrow. He's presenting, but he's got a lot of great stuff on his Patreon and, of course, on Cineversity. And on my own YouTube channel, I've done so many dynamic simulation stuff in the past that now I got to update because there's new, better ways to do it. So stay tuned to my YouTube channel because definitely going to be updating to all the new clothy stuff. But yeah.
Absolutely. I've been loving the chat on YouTube as well, and the comments about how responsive it is.
And with a 3090.
Of course,
a single 3090. Yeah.
I'm liking the comment about this is me when I'm trying to do a fitted sheet on the bed as well. Nice. But we did have a couple of questions though for you. So yes. Ridvan was asking why the cloth and belt doesn't it work as soon as you apply weight maps on the cloth sim? And it follows this up with, is Maxon planning to fix this? So it's effectively asking, is that a question? Is that a question?
That's a question for you.
That is a question for me.
Why don't you fix that? No.
That's fantastic to get that feedback, Ridvan.
Well, no, that's a thing that I used in a previous tutorial where you can control, like, again, I didn't even get into like vertex maps and all the different like field forces. Like I didn't even have time to get into that stuff yet. But yeah, there's so many different ways you can control cloth, and actually there's a new way that let's see, weight maps on the cloth sim. So there's actually a way to connect dynamic objects to other objects without the belt tag at all, which I didn't even get to, which is the dynamic connectors.
Is that something you might cover on Thursday?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, yeah. Fantastic. Great question, thank you. And also Vitas wants to know, what is the post-collision passes for?
So Vitas, nice to see you in the chat. He's Denver area local. But yeah, the post-collision passes, that is if you up your collision passes and you're still seeing something happening in intersections, that's where you would be like, all right, well, let me try to up that post-collision passes. So it's always like, if you up one number, and I'm looking at the guy that developed the whole simulation system too, so not if I'm right. So if the collision passes, if you up them and it still doesn't fix the thing, try upping that, and that should try to solve the error.
Yeah, so post-collision is a new collision detection that is done at
so it's a different algorithm or something, but it happens at the end. It calculates at the end of the simulation.
Residual interventions, that should help solve it.
So if you have residual intersection, that should solve it, yes. It always helps to have the guy who made it right by your side.
Absolutely. Live update right from the dev team.
Right from the dev team itself.
Amazing. And feel free, people who are here, to hit them up for questions on exactly this.
I know I will.
Yes. But thanks again, EJ. Really appreciate it. Some beautiful work, as usual. And let's give it a once more time for EJ before we move on.